Hi, boys and girls. This is Ms. Kathy. I'm so happy you've joined me today for another story just for you. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Philippians 4:6. Water Out of the Rock by Deborah, Cavel, Greant. The sun rose slowly over the desert horizon, bringing with it the promise of another extremely hot day. Uncle John walked into the large old farmhouse kitchen, a look of worry on his face. He waited for a moment before he spoke to Aunt Etta. "The well's dry," he said. "There's no water left in it at all." Although it was only 4:30 in the morning, the temperature was already almost 100 degrees. Perspiration trickled down his neck and soaked into his collar. Uncle John and Aunt Etta were used to being up before the early summer sun. It took a long time to prepare breakfast for 35 hungry children, and the boys and girls had to eat in 2 shifts because there weren't enough chairs, tables, or dishes. Several years had passed since Uncle John and Aunt Etta had bought the old ranch with the dream of opening a children's home for otherwise homeless youngsters. Now the old place practically jumped with the happy shouts of the children who had come to live there. Uncle John walked over to the telephone. "I'll borrow the water truck from town and haul water, but that will leave you to handle the work alone. Can you manage?" Aunt Etta nodded. "The older ones will help. But what about the well? We can't afford to have a new one drilled." "I'll talk to the driller this afternoon. Maybe he can come and look at it anyway." Uncle John completed his call and headed out the door. Aunt Etta went about her work with a heavy load on her heart. God had held them in his hand for so many years. Surely he wouldn't let them down now. In an hour, the water truck rolled into the yard, and 500 gallons of water gushed into the storage tank. But all too soon, the last of the water was gone. Uncle John and Aunt Etta realized that the truck would have to make many trips a day to provide the water they needed for the children and farm animals. So the truck rattled and sloshed back and forth all day between the water supply in town and the ranch. Uncle John and Aunt Etta prayed while they worked. The children soon realized that the problem was very important to their future, and they prayed for water as often as the grown-ups. The next morning the driller came to check the well. He looked at the somber faces and big eyes surrounding him and searched for an easy way to tell them the old well was finished. Uncle John said it for him. "No more water in the well, is there?" The man looked sadly at the children and then replied, "No, I'm sorry, just dry sand. Look, I'll drill a new well. Can't promise." His words almost ran together. "Pay me when you can. I'll start right away." "How much?" Uncle John asked cautiously. He knew they had no extra money. The man pressed his lips together and dug his boot toe into the soft sand at his feet. $10 a foot, he finally said. "That's cheaper than my usual." Uncle John and Aunt Etta exchanged looks and nods. "We'll pay you. It may take a long time. I guess you know that. But we'll pay." The man smiled and rubbed his hands on his dirty jeans. "I'll get to work then." But several hours later he was shaking his head as he examined a broken drilling bit. He had already broken 3. He had hit a layer of rock so hard that the diamond-edged bits couldn't break through. There was no hope of a new well now, and he trudged toward the house to break the bad news to Uncle John and Aunt Etta. The first shift of children sat eating their supper, and all looked up expectantly as he walked in. When the driller told him the news, Uncle John shook his head again and again. No, I just can't believe God wants us to give up. These children, most of them, have no other homes, nowhere else to go. We just can't give up." He spoke directly to the man. "Leave your equipment here and try again in the morning." The man held out his hands. "Look, nothing can happen overnight to that layer of rock. No one in this area has a well because of it, but because of your other well, I thought that maybe I would hit water before I got to the rock. I've done all I can." "Let's take it to the Lord. He can give us water. Please, just one more try tomorrow," Uncle John pleaded. The man threw up his hands. "All right, one more try tomorrow, but it won't do any good. I've drilled wells for years around here. It just can't be done." Uncle John and Aunt Etta gathered their family for evening worship and told them about the situation. Soon a prayer circle was formed. Through the night they continued their prayers, Aunt Etta taking time occasionally to tuck away to bed a smaller one who had fallen asleep. At 7 o'clock the next morning, the driller drove up in his big truck. He found Uncle John, Aunt Etta, and the older children waiting by the well. He looked at them with a mixture of hope and despair. "I sure wish it would work, kids," he said as he lowered his bit into the drilled hole and began adding lengths of pipe. After a few minutes drilling, he added another length of pipe. "Must have forgotten how far down I went," he said in a puzzled voice. When he had used all the pipe, he started pulling it back up, saying, "I couldn't have made that much of a mistake." The pipe and bit emerged covered with sandy mud. The man stared at it and exclaimed, "Mud? That was rock last night. It can't be mud." Aunt Etta began to cry softly, and Uncle John hugged her with one arm and several children with the other. "Try again," he said. "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" In a few days, the new well was gushing clear, cold, wonderful, abundant water. The driller packed up his tools in the truck and stopped at the house to say goodbye to Uncle John and Aunt Etta. He found them on their knees, a slip of paper in Uncle John's hand. Uncle John rose to his feet, tears running down his cheeks. "We asked for water. We never asked for the money to pay for it, but we just received a check from a man we've never met. It's just enough to pay for the drilling." Uncle John signed the check over to the driller and waved to him from the porch of the house as he drove away. Many years later, the well still pours out cold, clean water for 90 children who live with Uncle John and Aunt Etta. Through the years, more than 600 children have lived in the big old farmhouse and the other houses that have been built around it, and all of them have heard the story of the wonderful well and have drunk of its wonderful water.
The story you have heard today is from God's Greatest Stories, written by various authors and compiled by Randy Fischel, and used with permission from the Pacific Press Publishing Association. If you're interested in any other books published by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, please visit AdventistBookCenter.com or call 1-800-765-6955.
This podcast is a production of the Carolina Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.